leaders have assembled to discuss the situation in Lebanon and the escalating tensions. I believe we can hear from Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Let's have a listen to what she has to say.
100,000 people have been displaced from southern Lebanon. At least 60,000 have been displaced from northern Israel. The exchanges of fire have caused numerous casualties, including among civilians, and significant damage to homes, civilian infrastructure, and agricultural land on both sides of the Blue Line. The risk of further expansion of this cycle of violence is extremely serious and poses a grave threat to the stability of Lebanon, Israel, and the whole region. Mr. President, on the afternoon of 17 September, many communication devices, or pagers, primarily used by members of Hezbollah, exploded simultaneously across Lebanon. Similar explosions were also reported in Syria. The following day, a second wave of explosions, smaller in scale but more lethal, was reported throughout the same areas of Lebanon. This time, the devices involved were two-way handheld radios reportedly used by Hezbollah. Devices exploded in homes, cars, supermarkets, and streets. Lebanon's Ministry of Public Health stated that 37 people were killed, including 2 children, and more than 3,400 people were injured in the successive explosions. Medical professionals and hospitals are working around the clock to help the wounded. Lebanese society, old and young, have been in profound shock and panic. The Lebanese government has strongly denounced the attack, which it attributed to Israel. Caretaker Prime Minister Mikati said, and I quote, "It represented a serious violation of Lebanese sovereignty and a crime," end quote. In a speech on 19 September, Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah said in response to the attacks that Israel exceeded all limits, laws, and red lines. And he vowed, and I quote, "to exact a heavy price and a fair punishment," end quote. He reiterated that the Lebanon front would only stop once the aggression on Gaza ended. In a letter to the President of the Security Council on 18 September, the Islamic Republic of Iran blamed Israel for the explosions. Noting that its ambassador to Lebanon was among those wounded, Iran stated that it, and I quote again, "reserves its right under international law to take required measures deemed necessary to respond to such a heinous crime and violation," end quote. To date, the government of Israel has made no official comment on these developments. Mr. President, since the explosions on 17 and 18 September, exchanges of fire across the Blue Line have continued, showing worrying signs of escalation. The exchanges include some of the heaviest bombardment of southern Lebanon since 8 October 2023. Israeli aircraft have conducted a high number of airstrikes and overflights, including breaking the sound barrier over Beirut on several occasions. In addition, we are receiving initial reports about an Israeli airstrike in the southern suburbs of Beirut hours ago, which Israel said targeted and killed a number of senior Hezbollah leaders. The Lebanese Health Ministry said at least 12 people were killed and over 60 injured in the strike. Meanwhile, heavy barrages of rocket, drone, artillery, and anti-tank missile fire from Lebanon have killed 2 IDF soldiers and wounded 10 Israelis. UNIFIL is monitoring the situation closely. On 16 September, Israel's Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, suggested that the center of gravity was moving north, including the transfer of military forces. Speaking of the onset of a, quote, "new phase of war," end quote, he suggested the only way left to ensure the return of Israel's northern communities to their homes was through military action. Reports from Israeli media indicate that Israel Defense Forces 98th Division was transferred from Gaza to the Northern Command, adding to concerns about the risk of further escalation on the horizon. From Lebanon, UN Special Coordinator Hennes Plekar has been in constant contact with all concerned actors, including caretaker Prime Minister Mikati, Foreign Minister Mr. Bouhabib, Speaker of Parliament Nabi Berri, and their offices and other authorities. In her meetings, she has continued to push for a diplomatic solution and warned against further escalation. She continues to underscore that military advances would not restore stability or enable displaced civilians on both sides of the Blue Line to return home safely. She will travel to Israel early next week for consultations with relevant counterparts. Mr. President, in the current fragile regional context, the devastating war in Gaza continues. Nearly a year after the horrific atrocities committed by Hamas on 7 October, Israeli military operations, including bombardment from the air and land and armed exchanges with Hamas and other militants, continue across the Strip. The number of fatalities tragically keeps increasing. More than 41,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, many of them children. At the same time, the indiscriminate launching of rockets by Hamas and other armed groups toward population centers in Israel also continues. I once again echo the words of the Secretary General. We need an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all remaining hostages, and a massive scale-up of humanitarian aid to Gaza. The risk to security and stability, not only in Lebanon, but also in the region, could not be clearer or graver. The Secretary General has already expressed his deep alarm over these events. I echo his sentiments and strongly urge all actors to exercise maximum restraint to avert any further escalation. They must abide by their obligations under international law concerning the protection of civilians. I also strongly urge member states with influence over the parties to leverage it now. As we approach a full year of near-daily exchanges of fire across the Blue Line and bloodshed in Gaza, too many lives have been lost, too many people have been displaced, and too many livelihoods have been destroyed. But if things continue as they are, we risk seeing a conflagration that could dwarf even the devastation and suffering witnessed so far. It's not too late to avoid such folly. There is still room for diplomacy, which must be used without delay. The Secretary General continues to urgently call on the parties to recommit to the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701 and immediately return to a cessation of hostilities.